Hello everybody, this is Johns Hopkins with Baltimore Heritage, and we're back with another of our 5-Minute Histories videos. And today I'm in way east Baltimore, near where Erdman and Pulaski Highway intersect. If you know where Hopkins Bayview campus is, I'm just a little bit north of there. And specifically, I'm on a lane called Horner's Lane. And behind me is the Bohemian National Cemetery. That's what we're going to talk about today. It got its start in 1884, I believe, as Baltimore's Czech community was growing. And it is the resting place of 4,000 souls. It also played some important roles in helping foster Baltimore's sense of Czech community pride, and it's the final resting place for the actress that John Waters called his first star. We'll get to that, but before we do, let's say a word or two about Bohemia. Bohemia has a number of different meanings. As an adjective, Bohemian, you've heard like Bohemian lifestyle, has really only a loose connection to the region Bohemia that we're concerned with today. As a somewhat aside, the Bohemian got its start as a term in 19th century Paris in the Latin Quarter, as a bunch of writers and artists and musicians were living what was then called unconventional lifestyles there. People said they lived like La Bohème. La Bohème referred to the Romani people, sometimes derogatorily called gypsies, who had begun arriving in France in the 1400s from parts of Asia and Eastern Europe through Bohemia. So that's where that term comes from. Bohemia, for our purposes, is a region in Eastern Central Europe, and we got a lot of immigrants from there. At our height, although the immigrants started coming maybe in the 1700s, but at our height around 1880, 1890, 1900, we had about 15,000 people who hailed from Bohemia, putting us right up there with Chicago and New York, Cleveland, and St. Louis as hubs of Bohemian immigration. Although it's a little hard to tell exactly how many Bohemian immigrants we had, because depending on the year and the immigration official, if you came over from Bohemia, you might get marked down as Bohemian, or maybe Czech, or maybe Austrian. So a little bit hard to count, but probably about 15,000. A lot of those 15,000 centered their Baltimore Bohemian life around St. Wenceslas Church in East Baltimore. Many of our Bohemians were Catholic. St. Wenceslas was a Roman Catholic church, but not all of them. And in fact, this cemetery was for Protestant Bohemians and Bohemians who really didn't identify with any religion. And although I am sure there were tensions between folks of different religions, there was also a great sense of national pride and identity from folks from Bohemia. And this cemetery played an important role, at least in two of those. The first was through a group called the Czech-Slovak Protective Society. I am not going to try to pronounce that in its native tongue. But the Protective Society, the Baltimore Lodge, owns and runs the cemetery today. The society has its roots back in 1854 in St. Louis. It started as sort of an insurance organization. You became a member, paid modest dues, and then if you got sick, the Protective Society would help keep you up and your family up if you couldn't work, for example. And it also paid for funeral expenses. Our Baltimore Lodge got its start in 1880, and then one of the first things it did was buy the land out here and start this cemetery for Bohemian immigrants, central to its mission of sort of insurance providing. The second way this cemetery played a role in helping cement Baltimore's Bohemian community was through an organization called Soal, which I believe means falcon in Czech. It's a sports and cultural organization that held sporting events and cultural events out here in the cemetery. This is a bucolic sort of rural cemetery. You would take a streetcar from President Street to the Orangeville stop and then spend the day out here, maybe watching gymnastics, speaking Czech, meeting up with your neighbors, eating Czech food. Sokol was founded in 1862 in Prague. Its motto was a strong mind and a sound body. It took its cues from some German similar organizations that paired a growth of your mind with a strong body. And it was also, like its German counterparts, very nationalist, fostering a sense of Czech pride. Our organization, our chapter of Soal, got its start in 1872, so just 10 years after the first one in Prague, and it held events downtown at a cigar factory, the Kremlberg Cigar Factory, one of its members, and then on weekends out here for the day in this cemetery. Today, the cemetery is still owned by the Protective Society, and in fact, they recently fixed up one of the two historic buildings on the complex and turned it into what they call the Bohemians of Baltimore Museum, which includes, among other things, a Czech ancestors database, if that's something of interest to you. All right, I'm going to wrap up. I started by saying that one of the folks buried here was the person who John Waters called his first star. That person was Patricia Soul, who went by the stage name Malcolm Soul. I hope I pronounced that right. She got her training as a painter at MICA, and then worked as a bartender in New York, and then a bartender at that, well, Bohemian place in Baltimore called Marduk's, that fantastic artsy bar. She apparently dyed her hair what one person called iron orange, wore clothes that the hipsters were wearing in the cabarets in Berlin at the time, and was ahead of her time. In 1966, Marduk's held an art show that they called the Malcolm Show, where 25 artists depicted Malcolm in the nude. She apparently was thrilled. On opening night, she said, "It's very funny to see 25 of yous staring at you. It's a funny thing. I feel like it's my birthday." So she was clearly happy with that. If you're curious, Waters starred her in two of his earliest films. She was the smoking nun in Roman Candles and the governess in Eat Your Makeup, if you're a John Waters fan. All right, two more quick folks. One, maybe not quite as colorful, at least in that way, was a gentleman named August Kleka. He was a local kingmaker and politician, city council member, acting mayor for a time, and Franklin Delano Roosevelt appointed him a federal marshal of Maryland. So he made good on a national level. Final person I just want to mention is somebody who I think will be dear to many of our hearts, even if we haven't heard his name, and that's a gentleman named Jaroslav Roco. Roco was a baker in East Baltimore. There are a lot of bakers in East Baltimore, but he was very forward-looking, and in fact is credited nationally in helping develop the baking techniques and packaging techniques and marketing techniques to get baked goods into this newfangled thing that was coming up at the time called the grocery store. So the next time you go get a muffin from Safeway or Giant, you can give a little thanks to Roco's. All right, I'm going to wrap up and say next time you're out here in East Baltimore, stop by. It's a beautiful place, and maybe better yet, give the folks at the museum a call ahead of time and arrange for a visit. Thanks so much, and we'll see you next time.